Welcome back to Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Charleston. In this week's video, I'm going to talk about two buildings that pretty much everyone thinks of when talking about haunted properties: a jail and a theater. The Old City Jail of Charleston and the Dock Street Theater. I'm going to start with what is considered the most haunted building in all of Charleston, the Old City Jail. Known as the most haunted building in South Carolina, the Old City Jail on 21 Magazine Street was formerly the most grotesque penal establishment in pre-Civil War America. Its reputation proceeded into America's most divisive period and beyond before finally shutting its horrid corridors in 1939. The jail was built in 1802 and was the Charleston Jail until 1939. Most of the building still standing is the original structure, but there are places that had to be renovated shortly after opening. The Old City Jail was known for housing some of the worst criminals in the city. The criminals here committed crimes such as murder and theft. The way that it was set up had the worst criminals all in the same floor, and so on. The first floor was set up for the gentlemen criminals, the second floor for the debtors and prostitutes. The third floor was for murderers and thieves. There were a few of these hardened criminals that were hanged in the yard at the jail. There were also some criminals here that did die inside the walls due to natural causes. The Old City Jail was used as a POW camp during the Civil War. The jail actually ran out of space for all the Union soldiers there. Some of them were forced to sleep outside because of the overcrowding. During the 1886 earthquake, the jail's tower and entire top floor of the main building were damaged. These parts ended up having to be removed from the Old City Jail because the damage was too much to repair. In 1911, the last man to be hanged at the jail was hanged. The gallows then were removed and never used again. The 1930s saw the jail in terrible condition. In 1939, it was officially closed after being the city's jail for 136 years. The jail did become a museum in the 1970s, and then it was sold in the 90s to Charleston Housing Authority. It became the American College of Building Arts, and it's used to show students about renovating and restoring historic buildings. The building is still being used, and those who have come inside all have a tale to tell. Some of them have heard some strange sounds, while others have seen what they think are spirits and ghosts. Just like many other haunted buildings, the Old City Jail has quite a haunted history. There are thousands of people that died here, and that could be part of the reason why many spirits have come back to find peace or rest. No matter what they are looking for, they have caused quite a stir around the building. The jail used to be a hospital, a poorhouse, and then it became a home for runaway slaves. Over 10,000 people have died in the Old City Jail. Cellmates died of sickness, injuries, homicides, and executions. Known as the most haunted building in South Carolina, the Old City Jail on 21 Magazine Street was formerly the most grotesque penal establishment in pre-Civil War America. Its reputation proceeded into America's most divisive period and beyond before finally shutting its horrid corridors in 1939. The jail was built in 1802 and was the Charleston Jail until 1939. Most of the building still standing is the original structure, but there are places that had to be renovated shortly after opening. The Old City Jail was known for housing some of the worst criminals in the city. The criminals here committed crimes such as murder and theft. The way that it was set up had the worst criminals all in the same floor, and so on. The first floor was set up for the gentlemen criminals, the second floor for the debtors and prostitutes. The third floor was for murderers and thieves. There were a few of these hardened criminals that were hanged in the yard at the jail. There were also some criminals here that did die inside the walls due to natural causes. The Old City Jail was used as a POW camp during the Civil War. The jail actually ran out of space for all the Union soldiers there. Some of them were forced to sleep outside because of the overcrowding. During the 1886 earthquake, the jail's tower and entire top floor of the main building were damaged. These parts ended up having to be removed from the Old City Jail because the damage was too much to repair. In 1911, the last man to be hanged at the jail was hanged. The gallows then were removed and never used again. The 1930s saw the jail in terrible condition. In 1939, it was officially closed after being the city's jail for 136 years. The jail did become a museum in the 1970s, and then it was sold in the 90s to Charleston Housing Authority. It became the American College of Building Arts, and it's used to show students about renovating and restoring historic buildings. The building is still being used, and those who have come inside all have a tale to tell. Some of them have heard some strange sounds, while others have seen what they think are spirits and ghosts. Just like many other haunted buildings, the Old City Jail has quite a haunted history. There are thousands of people that died here, and that could be part of the reason why many spirits have come back to find peace or rest. No matter what they are looking for, they have caused quite a stir around the building. The jail used to be a hospital, a poorhouse, and then it became a home for runaway slaves. Over 10,000 people have died in the Old City Jail. Cellmates died of sickness, injuries, homicides, and executions. When the jail finally became a place for convicts, it was built to house only 130 prisoners. At its busiest time, the jail was clearly holding about 350 inmates. There was an obvious problem with overcrowding, and the conditions were not at all the best. There were diseases all over the place. There were also some inmates that had quite a record for killings, piracy, and violence. Some of the prisoners at the Old City Jail included Lavinia Fisher and her husband John, Jacques Alexander Tardy, and Denmark Vesey. Little information is actually known about Lavinia's backstory, but it's believed that she had lived in America for most of her life. What is known for certain is that she would go on to marry a man by the name of John Fisher. Lavinia and John became notorious after their arrest and conviction. Though there is some debate about whether or not Lavinia was a killer or just an accessory to the murders committed. The most common belief to date is that she was not only a killer, but a vicious one. Lavinia and her husband were owners of the Charleston Inn, the 6-mile Wafer House, a reference to the hotel's location as it was situated 6 miles north of the city of Charleston. During their era of managing the 6-mile Wafer House in the early part of the 19th century, reports of guests disappearing commonly made their way to the sheriff. But despite the complaints, no actions against the couple were taken at first, as Lavinia and John were popular and highly regarded amongst most locals. The Fisher's status didn't stop the stories from coming out. Rumors of how Lavinia would invite traveling businessmen to the inn for dinner and then would proceed to ask the individual questions regarding their job to ascertain how much money they had in their person. After dinner, Lavinia would give the traveler a cup of tea spiked with poison. When the traveler had drunk the tea and retired to their room for the night, Lavinia's husband John would then enter the traveler's room, where he would stab the person in their weakened state, then steal all their belongings, later disposing of the body. An alternate and more Sweeney Todd and Mrs. Lovett type tale has Lavinia taking up a larger role in the murders. In this version, Lavinia is giving travelers a cup of tea made only to send them, the recipient, into a deep sleep. Once the traveler has passed out on the bed for the night, Lavinia would pull a special lever that would cause the bed to collapse, dropping the traveler into a pit filled with spikes. Sensationalized rumors of the time have made it virtually impossible in deducing what is fact and what is fiction when it comes to the Fishers and their activity at the 6-mile Wayfarer House. But there are some eyewitness accounts. During the height of the Fishers' criminal activity, vigilantes arrived from Charleston to clean up the Fishers' neighborhood of crime. The Fishers were able to keep a low profile while the vigilante group was around. After some time, the group believed that they had sufficiently dealt with the gang and returned back to the city. One of the members of the vigilante group was left behind to watch over the neighborhood. This young man was David Ross. The following morning, Ross was taken captive and brought back before the gang. Ross, terrified, looked to Lavinia for help. A futile plea, as she reportedly choked Ross and threw him headfirst through a window. Somehow Ross was able to escape the gang and fled back to Charleston, where he contacted the authorities. Another eyewitness, rather living witness, was a man by the name of John Peoples. Peoples had stumbled upon the Fishers Inn and asked Lavinia for a room. She informed him that she did not believe they had any vacancies, but invited him in and offered him a cup of tea. Peoples accepted, however, not being a fan of tea, he dumped out his cup when Lavinia wasn't looking. Believing that he had drunk the tea, Lavinia began to ask him questions about his dealings, sticking to her usual routine. After finding out that Peoples was a man of wealth, she suddenly told him there was a free room after all. Peoples became very alarmed during his conversation with Lavinia, but accepted anyway. Still wary, Peoples decided to rest in the room's chair instead of the bed itself. Shortly after he had drifted off to sleep, he woke to the sound of a bed collapsing. Taking notice of the Fishers' actions, Peoples immediately jumped out of the room's window and made his way to Charleston, where he informed authorities. With the accounts of Ross and Peoples, the police were finally able to imprison the Fishers and their gang. The Fishers were taken to the old jail, where they awaited trial. The two were sentenced to hang for their crimes. As the execution date neared, John began to search for penance with the help of the minister, Reverend Richard Foreman. However, Lavinia did not seem to care about atoning for her sins. While her husband pleaded for forgiveness as his final moments approached, Lavinia used her last minutes to mock the crowd and came out to see her hang. Rumor has it she taunted them by saying, "If you have a message for the devil, tell me now, for I will be seeing him in a moment." After the rope had cracked, Lavinia was buried in the old jail's cemetery. Jacques Alexander Tardy is best known for piracy, and in a city like Charleston, there was a lot of it. Pirates practically ran the city, and they were everywhere. Tardy had quite the track record with authorities. He was known for stealing property and money. He did serve some time doing hard labor for his crimes, but that wasn't enough to make him change his ways. While he was on his way to Charleston on a ship, he poisoned 8 people with arsenic and told authorities that the chef was to blame. This caused the chef to later be executed. Tardy was not a man to trust. He actually poisoned the crew on another ship and then blamed the chef again, but this time the chef was found innocent. Tardy did end up spending a few years in Old City Jail. Denmark Vesey is another historical inmate at the Old City Jail. He helped to form a rebellion of former slaves to march on Bastille Day. His big plan was for the former slaves for them to march to the homes of their former masters and execute them. This did not go as well as he planned, and in 1822 he was imprisoned in the Old City Jail. The stories of Vesey tell us that he spent many days hanging out in the prison until it was time for him to be punished for the slave revolts. Vesey was later hanged for his plan. Of these prisoners, it's said that one or all of them still haunt the jail to this day. From the effects of his plot, Charleston put harsher laws and restrictions on slaves of the city. If there were black seamen in the city, they had to be kept until they were set to sail on another trip. The first ghost that is said to be lingering around the Old City Jail is Lavinia Fisher. Paranormal experts will always bring up her final words before her death. There have been multiple sightings of Fisher walking around the Old City Jail, and paranormal teams have even got a recording of her speaking. When they asked her a question, she answered, "The devil." There have even been pictures and videos taken of her ghost as well. One spectral enthusiast decided to go on a haunted tour of the Old City Jail. They were so excited to go on their first ghost tour, but afterwards they said they would never go on another ghost tour again. Their story began at the front door of the jail. They were with a dozen or so others who were ready to get the pants scared off of them. The tourists took what they said were hundreds of photos, and they didn't see much at the beginning of the tour. They said it was alright, but was getting boring with all the history lesson. Then they saw something. They saw a man walking from one side of the hall to another. When they asked about the man, the tour guide told them that it was Mr. Fisher. As the tour guide began walking further into the jail, the tourists felt something tug their hair. They jumped and asked if anyone had seen anything. No one had, so they kept going about their business. Minutes later, the tourists said they felt someone's hand on their neck. They weren't able to breathe, and the tour guide thought they were having a heart attack. About 5 minutes later, the tourist was back to normal. When the tour group asked if they were all right, they told the group that someone was choking them. They immediately left the jail and ended the tour for themselves right there. For the next location, I'm going to talk about Charleston's first theater, the Dock Street Theater. There's some very rich history in Charleston, South Carolina. In fact, a lot of the history there centers around pirates, the American Revolution, and the American Civil War. While the Deep South is a grand place to visit, the history there isn't the most positive. This could be part of the reason that the city is seen as very haunted. Along with the streets of Charleston, there are ghosts that linger in the historic buildings as well. One of these buildings is Dock Street Theater. The construction of the original Dock Street is believed to have commenced in the year of 1735, with the grand opening taking place on the 12th of February of the year 1736. Its location was not far from the current address of the theater. The first incarnation of the theater was short-lived. The exact cause of its demise is not clear, but most believe it burned down in the Charleston fire of 1740. While the Dock Street burned down, it was replaced with another theater, which remained open for over 40 years when it closed down in the 1780s. It was shut down in large part due to the construction of a new and more grand theater just around the corner. Nearly 30 years later, in 1809, Planters Hotel was created by the Caldera. The building would go through another round of renovations just a little over 25 years later in 1835. It was during this renovation the building received its enduring style, elements of which can still be seen on the now Dock Street Theater. After the work of 1835 had been completed, the Planters Hotel became known as one of the preeminent hotels in all of Charleston. During the glory days of the Planters Hotel, it was known to play host to theater troupes. One of the actors of these theater troupes has a name that may sound pretty familiar, Junius Brutus Booth. This Booth was actually the father of the infamous John Wilkes Booth. One popular story told about the elder Booth occurred during his stay at the Planters Hotel around 1838. The events of the story unfolded one night after the performance, when for unknown reasons, Booth became enraged and attacked the hotel's manager, almost killing the man. This successful time period would be succeeded by a calamity of unfortunate events. First, the American Civil War, which, very little went unscathed during the war. But this was especially true in the South, and Charleston was no exception. After the war, the once luxurious hotel became a victim of the city's struggling economy. The neglected hotel faced further damage as a result of the devastating 1886 Charleston earthquake. The needs of the building had become too great for any one man in Charleston to take on, and without the slightest bit of hope, the people of Charleston were forced to turn a blind eye to the once great hotel as it was left to decay and become another forgotten relic of the antebellum era. The building that housed the Planters Hotel was left abandoned for far too long, nearly 50 years, but things were beginning to look up for the once majestic property, as there were plans on the way. Those plans came about in the mid-1930s when the Works Progress Administration, an agency established during the Great Depression to create work for unemployed, announced their intentions to do just that for the people of Charleston. The work? To renovate the condemned structure formerly known as the Planters Hotel. The first step in restoring not just the building, but Charleston's economy was for the city to hire new workers for the massive undertaking. The following step was to renovate the old hotel back to its original glory. While the outside of the building was brought back to the old swinging days of the 1830s and 40s, the building was not to become a hotel again. No, the building was being reborn into a theater. And, bearing Charleston's history in mind, the name of its first theater was revived. The Dock Street Theater was alive once again. The theater remained open until the year 2007, when the building was forced to close temporarily for greatly needed renovations. After all, it had been 70 plus years since the WPA initiative received the building. 3 short years and $19 million later, on March 18, 2010, the Dock Street Theater held its grand reopening to the delight of all the Charleston locals. Today, the historic theater continues to serve as a cultural touchstone for the city, as it hosts a full season of performances produced by the Charleston Stage Company. With nearly 350 years of history under its belt, the city of Charleston lays host to countless ghosts. Some of the most infamous lost souls can be found at the historic Dock Street Theater. Guests of the theater have claimed to see spirits roaming about, sightings of ghostly shadows in the rafters, and apparitions on the stage. Many are left to wonder just who these ghosts were. Were they failed actors, or were they longtime admirers of the theater? Or is it possible that something more tragic occurred at the building? One of these specters is believed to be Junius Brutus Booth. No one is quite sure why his ghost is haunting the Dock Street Theater, formerly the Planters Hotel, as he was not even in Charleston at the time of his passing. He was miles away in Louisville, Kentucky. Aside from staying at the former hotel with his theater troupe, the rumor that he tried to kill the manager of the Planters Hotel, he doesn't really have any strong ties to the building. Nothing to warrant his haunting the stage. But logic and facts aside, it is possible that Junius Brutus Booth is indeed haunting the theater. However, it is more plausible that it is a ghost of another lost soul, maybe another actor unwilling to leave the spotlight of the stage. The most frequently spotted ghost at Dock Street Theater is Nettie. Some claim that her full name was Nettie Dickerson, while others believe that she was nameless and thusly dubbed Nettie by the locals. Nettie lived in Charleston during the 1800s and could usually be found at the Planters Hotel. She was not a guest nor a member of the staff at the Planters Hotel per se. You see, Nettie was a bit of a freelancer. Her occupation was the world's oldest profession, prostitution. The ghost of Nettie can be seen gliding around aimlessly throughout the Dock Street Theater. Some of those who have caught a glimpse of Nettie claim that she wore a tattered yet vibrantly colored red dress. But how did Nettie come to haunt the Dock Street Theater? During the Planters' heyday, the hotel was a place where wealthy men of Charleston would congregate. It was a place where they were free to drink copious amounts of alcohol, gamble away a small fortune, and engage in extramarital affairs with the local prostitutes. One of these ladies of the night was the 25-year-old Nettie. It's believed that young Nettie was a country girl who dreamed of the city life and arrived at Charleston sometime in the early 1840s. Nettie's reason for coming to Charleston were to find love and excitement. Unfortunately for Nettie, she lived in an era where 25 was considered well past marrying age. The wealthy men of Charleston were looking for brides who were still in their teens. Ugh. They were not interested in marrying someone considered to be a spinster, and her age wasn't the only thing holding her back. Her social status was also a factor. Back in the day, it was very uncommon for people to marry beneath their class. This was especially so in Charleston, a stigma that actually continues in some social circles in the city today. While many of the men of Charleston were taken with Nettie's beauty, they were only interested in lust, not love. Her dreams of a better life, dreams of happiness and love now crushed, Nettie looked for better work. Nettie became a clerk at St. Philip's Episcopal Church. She took to the job well and got along with the priest. Nonetheless, she felt as if she did not belong. It was impossible for her to compete, and she knew she would never truly be accepted into Charleston's high society. Nettie grew tired of trying to get ahead in Charleston and quit her job despite the priest's efforts to sway her from doing so, begging her not to lose her heart, but it was too late. She already had. With the money she was able to save from her job at the church, she went to one of the most upscale stores in Charleston and bought the most expensive dress they had. A gorgeous red dress that would catch the eye of any man. With her new dress, she entered the Planters Hotel with the intent to find a man. With her mindset, looks, and the red dress, she adapted well to her new profession. Still bitter at the society that refused to welcome her, she would continue to go to church every Sunday. Whenever one of the women, many of whom's husbands were Nettie's customers, would cast aspersions or give her an ugly look, she would audaciously confront said woman and her husband. As you can imagine, Nettie's lack of discretion cost her many of her customers, and she quickly became penniless. Distraught, she snapped. Nettie went out onto the second-floor balcony of the Planters, while in her red dress, and stayed out there despite the brewing storm. She began shouting out disparaging remarks against Charleston's high society, even as the storm intensified. The priest, who still cared for Nettie, rushed out into the street and tried to reason with her. It is said that she then hollered down to him, "You can't save me!" And, as fate would have it, a bolt of lightning struck Nettie dead. While the Planters Hotel is long gone, Nettie's spirit can still be seen at the Dock Street Theater, her fabulous red dress and all. This concludes this week's video of Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Charleston. I hope you enjoyed hearing some of the dark stories about this charming little southern town on the port, visiting the Old City Jail of Charleston and the Dock Street Theater. Remember to like this video and subscribe to my Girls Rock Productions channel. While you're here, check out some of my other playlists. On Stormi Teaches Music, I normally do live covers and guitar lessons on Mondays and Wednesdays at 11 p.m. Eastern. Now, I have been slacking off a little bit on those live streams for now because there have been a lot of different things going on, and currently my guitar string is snapped by my daughter, and she also broke my restringing tool, so it's going to be just a couple more weeks before I start those back up, and when I do, it will be on a Wednesday at 11 p.m. with the actual live lesson for Almost Lover by A Fine Frenzy. Then I will be doing covers on Mondays and the live lesson on Wednesdays of the song that I covered. I have also started up my Stormi Talks True Crime playlist, where I talk about some of the most controversial and heinous crimes in history. Those new videos are posted Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. If you are ever in Wilmington, North Carolina area, sign up for the Wilmington Ghosts Walking Tour or the Wilmington Spirits and Spirits Pub Crawl with U.S. Ghost Adventures. You can have me or one of our other talented guides show you around our historic downtown and hear some of the darkest stories the beautiful city on the beach has to offer. While you're visiting, if you decide you want to stay or buy a vacation home here, check out my Moving to Coastal Carolina channel and contact me, as I am a licensed realtor in southeastern North Carolina area. Don't forget to vote in the poll for next month's location, which will be another European location. Vote in the comments for either A, Dublin, Ireland, B, Madrid, Spain, C, Rome, Italy, or D, Paris, France. Tune in Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for next week's installment of Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Charleston. Until then, have a great week and stay safe.